I waited for the signal to appear, my dagger ready in my hand, and raised a red-painted lip to reveal a sharp fang. In the streets of the city, the lights, faint noise from the various pubs and nightclubs filled my ears, and the ever-present sound of people walking filled me with a growing sense of excitement. The city never slept, the perfect hunting ground. The lure of the hunt was difficult to ignore. I could hear their breath and their beating hearts. I watched in the shadows of an alleyway, leaning on the wall, and waited to select the correct target. Most were too broken, too exhausted, with no excitement in the kill. I saw him, and knew he hadn't seen me. He wore a suit, his jacket loose around his shoulders, and his tie hung off him, finally granted temporary freedom from a job he hated. Dark bags hung under his eyes, his sandy blonde hair hung low, and I stepped out following him. Since there were many people on the streets, too focused on their own lives or on their devices to notice me, the street lights made it difficult for them to see my eyes glow with an unnatural light. Modernity truly brought death. I followed him back to his apartment building, slipping through behind him without him noticing. Perhaps he suspected I was another faceless neighbor. The old lift creaked open, a questionable stain on the floor, and aged posters on the walls, with graffiti from some local teenagers laying claim to the building. Absent-mindedly, he used his hand to hold it open for me as he stepped inside, and he let out a distracted grunt when I thanked him. Did he realize I would be the last person he would speak to? He stepped out of the elevator once the doors opened, and a loud ding rang out. I waited, put my hand in, and stepped out. He walked toward his apartment, number 11, and I felt that hunger arise, one I could never deny. His pace slowed, and I thought he was going to turn back and look at me. Instead, he dug into his pocket and pulled out his keys and opened the door. He kept it open, flicked the lights on inside, and perhaps I should have been more cautious. He closed the door, leaving just a crack open, and I placed my fingers inside. I heard his footsteps as he walked through the kitchenette into the living room. There was barely any light. The light was dull, and the light bulb died, bringing more darkness. I noticed an unpleasant smell. Gently, I closed the door behind me, locking it to prevent any hope of escape. He turned on the television, a cheesy infomercial on the screen, and sat on the lounge, one foot lazily resting on the coffee table. I snuck up behind him, and only at the last minute I saw he had a large knife rested on his lap. My skin burned and my eyes stung. Blinking, I tried to clear them, and coughed several times, covering my mouth with my hand. I had never found someone who knew the weaknesses of my kind before. The skin on my hands burned, peeling off in clumps, and my clawed fingernails fell out, striking the floor when they fell. I lunged at him, mouth open, and ready to sink my fangs into his flesh. He grabbed my wrists. He was so calm, too calm. The hunt wasn't supposed to go this way. I kicked him in the thigh, and then stomped down on his knee, only for him to push me against the wall. I kicked out with my legs, my body struggling to move. Whatever was in the air was making me woozy, exhausted, and my strength was waning. He twisted my wrist, putting pressure on my thumb, causing me to drop the knife. Frantically, I looked for a weapon, and something caught my eye. A photograph. A man and a woman. They had their arms around each other and were smiling in a sun-filled park. They looked genuinely happy. Memories jolted back, and I remembered that day. I was human. I know you, I whispered, recognizing his face but not his name. I would have collapsed on the floor if he didn't hold my weight. I would have fallen. He carried me toward the lounge, lay my body down and stared at me, a tear in his eyes. I thought he was going to say something to me. The words stuck in his throat. He moved the stray hair tenderly away from my face and sighed, shoulders slumped in defeat, then walked over to the window. the light of the moon and the endless bright lights of the city, taking it in, and I wondered what was going through his mind. I was fully awake, despite not being able to move. The only sound I heard was the infernal clicking clock. I could barely even hear his heartbeat now. His phone beeped on the table. He walked over, picked it up, and read whatever message he received. Slowly closed his eyes, frowned, and lowered his shoulders. He knelt down close to me. The tears flowed now, and I remembered marrying him, only later being pulled away when I was hunted by a vampire. Turned. I spent my days hunting humans, both for pleasure and survival. I wanted to reach out to him now, tell him that it would be okay, and I'd never hurt him. He wept, holding my body close to him, and it didn't sound right. I had a feeling he was doing something behind my back. I wanted to scream at him, tell him to stop doing whatever he was planning, and no sound came out. I felt the knife pierce my chest. My mouth opened. No scream. Nothing. He was aiming for my heart but had missed. I could feel the undead life slowly leave my body. My hands turned grey, and the open stab wound allowed chemicals in the air easy access. I was burning from the inside out. My eyes pleaded with him to finish me, to kill me, to not let me suffer like this. He gripped it tightly in his hand, his eyes filled with pain and regret. My black blood coated his chest. Slowly it seeped out of me, and he closed his eyes, then stabbed again. Once, twice, and a final third time. He got the heart. Still, death wasn't instantaneous. He screamed wildly, took the knife, and slit into his wrists, his red blood intermingling with my black on the floor. He sat beside me, bleeding out, and I wished I could have warned him. My blood was now inside him, twisting him and turning him. His body twitched, grit teeth tight together, and I knew the moment he turned he would begin to hunt. He reached for the phone to call someone, fumbled and dropped it. I could see the last message from an unknown number. It said, "There is no cure for vampirism." Death is not the answer, by Cat Lionheart. Death is not the answer. I found out the hard way. I used to be alive. I think, anyway. I used to have a heart that beat, that pumped blood. I had warmth, and a body. Maybe I was never alive. Maybe I was just not dead, though. I never remember feeling happy. Not truly. Not even once. When I was a child, my parents loved me. They treated me well. My mother especially doted on me. A boy should be so lucky. I know logically that they loved me, but I never felt it. Not truly. When I was held close by my mother, or given a kiss by her, or a pat on the shoulder by my dad, I only felt slight things. Not like I should have, as I came to understand later. But when I was a child, I didn't know any better. When I was an adolescent in school, there was no pride in my grades, no comfort in so-called friends. After high school, I was abandoned by them, never seeing them again. They didn't care. I don't think they ever did. It didn't get any better. Adult friends were just as bad. No comfort, no care, nothing. I think I was perhaps a freak. I tried to be close with people. I hoped I would find someone I could feel something with. I wish it had been my mother. She always knew me best. But there was no one. And what was worse than that, thanks to being older and being exposed to things I now knew was missing, I think it was then that I wanted to die. anything to escape having to feel pain, having to be alone, even among people that love you. My mother knew. She made me promise I would never hurt myself, never attempt to leave her by leaving the world, as she put it. I wanted to love her. A mother is a boy's first love, so I promised her. I kept going. When I was an adult, on my own for a while, I had given up on people, on friends. It was not worth it. Then I did something stupid. There was a woman, one I felt something, even a little bit for, like my mother, but different. I was stupid. I tried to love again. I don't think I was meant to love or find happiness, and I was stupid to try. But I did. I hit it off with her, sorta. It worked for a while, long enough to have a beautiful baby girl. I thought maybe I would love my wife and my daughter more than anyone, that they would be the ones. I made another mistake. I promised them what I did my mother. It didn't last. Nothing good ever does. I couldn't be everything my wife needed. I knew it was coming before she did, but she left me. Took my daughter too. It was probably for the best. Better she never really know me. I would only disappoint her as I had her mother. What could a freak, a piece of trash in human form, offer her? They both deserved much better than I, but now my mistakes came for me. I was so tired of it all, of being alone, of being a disappointment. The world would be better off without me, and I knew it. I wanted to die more than ever. I wanted to kill myself, to get out of my flesh prison. Why must I wait to die naturally, to suffer, and cause more suffering to others by being alive? But I couldn't. I did not fear death, and no physical pain could be as bad as what I had already felt. But I made promises to those I loved. I couldn't break them. I would not be more of a disappointment than I already was. I was trapped, and I walked the world in a haze, a world of pain and loneliness that would never end. Some days I wanted to go back to my mother, to cry in her chest. Thought maybe it would make me feel better. It wouldn't, and I knew it. Only make her worry, make her suffer more if she knew. So I walked the world in that haze for years, just hoping to die. Then, one day I got my wish. I was walking home from the store at night. I had just gotten myself a small snack for that night. A car hit me. It hurt for a while. Then, not so much. At first I was thankful. I had always read and heard that if you died, you would not be in pain anymore. My parents, my wife and daughter, they would all be there at my funeral. They all cried. There was supposed to be no pain, but I felt worse than I ever had. There was no relief that I was promised. No release. I felt the same as ever, worse even. I learned something that day, something I should have known before. Death is not the answer. Think, how many ghosts have you heard of? How many were happy? How many were sad or angry? Why didn't I realize it sooner? You can't escape your pain in death. It follows you. I can't even try to help anything anymore, or even get help myself. I thought I was trapped before, but even then there was still hope. Now, there is nothing. No hope of release. Only pain. An eternity to feel it. I wish I had known. You must tell others. Death is not the answer, because there is no escape in death. Only more suffering. Always more suffering. ever since I first saw this house. I knew I wanted to own it and live there someday. It was my dream home, overlooking one of the local rivers, and would have had an incredible view. I was on a river tour on a historic boat, listening while the tour guide talked about the interesting places in the local area that were worth seeing, especially along the shoreline. There were historical houses from when the area was first settled, some of the old military buildings, and other things I wasn't really interested in. I sat up the top, taking in the afternoon sun and away from other people, spending more time focused on the scenery, and I was only half listening. I saw it among several trees, peeking out, and my eye was instantly drawn to it. I remembered seeing a picture of it when I was a child, and even back then, I wanted to go to the house and own it someday. It was a 2-story house, with white faded paint and a large balcony that overlooked the river. It had broken windows and clearly had seen better days, with vandals going in to damage the property, at least from what I could see from the outside. The tour guide said it had been owned by a wealthy landowner who died through mysterious circumstances, and ruin followed the family, even when they tried to escape. He also added that the local legend said it was haunted, and anyone who tried to purchase the home ended up losing everything. That the house had ended up claiming multiple people's lives. It all sounded interesting, and other people asked if there were ghost tours available. He said no, for the safety of the guests, and then the topic moved on to another feature. The rest of the tour was relatively boring. When the tour ended, I went back home. I, however, never forgot about the house and decided I need to learn more about it. I started researching the house and found some YouTube videos about it, even older posts on dead forums that discussed all the different theories. I tried to find it on Google Maps. I had to change the year in order to find it, going all the way back to 2008, when the house was in reasonable condition, and it was still visible from the road. It looked to be abandoned here too. In 2012, it looked like there had been renovations that had been started, but for whatever reason, they were never completed. The bricks and other materials left there were later stolen. I worked out the address, and I won't share here for, well, your safety. I don't want you or anyone else to get hurt. I searched for it again online, and found sites talking about the rumored history. Apparently murders and other perverse crimes happened here. However, there were no police reports or any newspaper articles about it. All gossip. I didn't think it was fair for such a beautiful home to fall into ruin. I contacted the council to see who owned the property and if they were willing to have me buy it. I discovered the owner lived overseas and had never even visited the property. She inherited it from a wealthy relative and was waiting for the local area to become more marketable in order to get the best price. However, dealing with the many issues the house brought was annoying at best. The end result was I received a decent price to take it. I was given a week to make a decision and given permission to visit the property. The driveway was non-existent, and the closer I got to the house, the fantasy of fixing it up was fading fast, with the estimate cost of it all. When the real estate agent opened the garage door, we found copper thieves had stolen the wiring out of the walls, and any leftover furniture had been trashed. Graffiti coated the walls, and the estate agent told me that the bones of the house were still solid. As I walked through, I realized the cost was adding up, far more than what I could afford, but I still wanted to go through the house. Questionable rooms with a bathroom. Inside the shower, it was filled with a variety of dead animals, some fresh and other skeletons. The tiling scraped from their claws as they tried to escape. I don't know how they ended up in there. The pair of us coughed, and the agent forgot himself. Hilariously. Even slipped into a rough accent and caught himself on. The kitchen. You could tell it was beautiful when it was new. Had all the cupboards ripped out, and vines had grown up through the drainage pipes. I climbed the beautiful staircase. The wooden beams hadn't been polished for so long, yet it retained its splendor. I nearly forgot everything else when I went up. All the other rooms were filled with broken bed frames, the vanities and chest of drawers open with nothing inside them. As I walked on the creaky floor, I wondered whether I would be able to handle all of this. All the doors had been left open, except for one. At the end of the hallway was a closed door, and I had a weird feeling when I got closer to it. It was sharply cold, and I asked the agent if he knew what the room was. He told me it was probably a bedroom. He was pale and couldn't stand still. Clearly didn't want to be there anymore. I opened the door, and to my surprise this room was different. It was a child's bedroom. Clean. The wallpaper wasn't damaged by graffiti or the elements. The bedding looked fresh, covered in teddy bears and other stuffed animals, while porcelain dolls rested on the shelves. There was no dust anywhere, and the carpet was clean. By the large bay window was a rocking chair, with a pillow on it, looking out at the river while another boat was floating by. I asked if someone had been living here, or if there was a squatter. Without it, why was this room so intact? There was also the terrifying thought of, why would a squatter have a kid's room prepared? The agent and I kept looking around the room for any clues. He stood near dolls and looked at them. I think he was frightened, and I opened up the bedside table drawer. There was a book closed with a lock, a gold chain with a locket, and a small bouquet of dried flowers. I picked up the diary. I remembered having one just like it when I was young, and I managed to get into the lock. I remember having one just like it when I was young, and I was able to break the lock. Maybe this was owned by the last resident. I saw a shadow coming in from the doorway, and thought the real estate agent was getting ready to leave. I called out, "Just a minute." I flicked through the pages, and the handwriting was beautiful, cursive, and as I kept going, the handwriting was becoming more erratic and aggressive the more I turned. "I hate them," was repeated all over the pages. It didn't change until I reached the final one. In jagged, black lettering it said, "Kill." The room felt cold, and I asked the agent if he opened a window, and if he felt the cold too. No reply. I turned around and noticed he was gone. I didn't want to be left alone here. I kept the open book in my hand, and walked out back through the back door. I had a feeling I wasn't alone, but no one was there. I called out the estate agent's name and received no response. I looked out the window and saw both of our cars still there, so I knew he hadn't left. I went down the creaking stairs and saw water puddles on the floor that had come from the outside. Maybe another animal had gotten in? The trail suddenly ended with no reason, and I stood close by. I remembered the stories, especially how the house attracted death. I saw the agent walk through the scrub in the direction of the river. He didn't look back when I called out to him, and nor did he pause. He kept walking down until he reached the water's edge. I expected him to stop, but instead he walked straight into the water. Nothing slowed him down. I saw bubbles where his head would have been under the water, and finally, they stopped. He gave no sign he was going to do this, no warning, nor any sign he was having trouble in life. I took out my phone and called the emergency hotline. It connected then dropped, so I tried it again, and the same thing happened. I walked back to the house and called. This time it wouldn't connect at all. I heard faint laughter coming from the dark hallways, and it felt like whoever this was coming closer. I didn't want to be pestered by a squatter or a homeless person, but I have to admit, it didn't feel like any of those. I left and went to sit in my car, feeling slightly safer in there. I tried calling again, and debated just leaving the scene altogether when I saw shadow figures walking past the windows. What frightened me was when one turned to look directly at me, and instantly I felt sick. I drove down the street and finally felt like I could breathe. The call finally connected. I waited while the police arrived on the scene, along with an ambulance, although it was too late for him. He was already dead. Since it was fresh, they were able to retrieve his body, and when they checked his messages, nothing gave any warning about what he intended on doing. I told them what happened, and soon my story only added to the local legends about the place. Forums had photos taken by urban explorers that showed the infamous child's bedroom, and I was able to watch it degrade until someone came in and vandalized it. The graffiti covered the walls, and someone set it on fire, leaving black ash all over the room. As you can guess, I never bought the house, and when I called the owner to apologize and tell her what happened, she didn't sound surprised, shocked, or angry. She simply said, "I knew you weren't going to buy it," and hung up. I haven't been able to stop thinking about the house and what could have been. As far as I knew, what happened to the real estate agent was the only death ever reported there. I haven't wanted to go back, but the curiosity has always remained. I've been scared to share my story because it might encourage some people to go there. I don't know if the shadow figures were bad entities trying to cause problems, or the ghosts of people who had died there. I still don't know what the laughter was, and I never want to hear it again. Sometimes late at night, I can hear that creepy laughter and feel like I'm being watched. And I wonder about whatever it was in that house, because I think it followed me home. My family made a dark pact with a demon centuries ago. We were at war with a rival family for the throne, and things were getting desperate. We had lost most of the battles and a lot of our territory. Nearly all of the potential heirs had perished or were maimed to a point where they could not be king. Most of our allies had gone to the opposite side. Our few remaining allies told us it was time to give up. Our time had come to an end, and to accept it. We were fighting a lost cause. Perhaps we would have been offered clemency, even a decent rank if we relented. Otherwise, our days were numbered. I sincerely believe they didn't think they would have survived without the pledge. Maybe the family would have been purged if they didn't. Or they could have found a way to escape, even thrive. Who knows what would have actually happened? It is said the pact was made in the ruins of a desecrated church. It was our church. My family paid to have it built, my ancestors' ancestors, and they took great pain to make it beautiful to behold. A sign of our undying faith and devotion. At one time, anyway. The family coat of arms was broken. It lay on the floor in pieces and was soiled on by the foe. The rival family had herded peasants inside and they burnt it to the ground. The people were burned alive. It is said that even now, their haunted screams can be heard by anyone and everyone who goes near it. They wander around the site, angry and in terrible pain. A sacred place forever corrupt and tainted. The church was never rebuilt and the site remains in ruins. Every time a developer tries to build on the site, there are always deaths and a lot of accidents that occur. The plans are always abandoned until it's forgotten completely. When they entered, they found the place had been destroyed. The aroma of burning flesh and rotting corpses both urged them to act, and as a warning, the two remaining brothers bickered between themselves, one in favor and one against it. They decided to leave it to a game of chance. They drew sticks to decide what they would do. 3 times fate was in favor of the summoning. as though there was no other option for them. It is unknown which rite they used. The demon was raised from the abyss, and they crudely bargained with the trickster, who knew which buttons to press. It used their anger, pain, desperation, and they made a terrible deal. They would get what they desired, but nothing ever came for free. The exact location where the rite took place is haunted, cursed, and no animals go there. No plants grow in that area. It is completely barren. No one in my family has visited the place in over 100 years. The last person, a distant aunt, died after tearing her own eyes and hair from her head. Her screams were now part of the symphony of death. I heard that she now acts as a grim herald of woe. Her whispers warn the elders of my family about what is going to come, what danger they need to prepare for. The debt wasn't the brothers only. It passed to their children, and to their children's children. Even if someone married into another family, the curse would follow them. Even when we are far from the cursed ground, the wicked pact follows us wherever we go. Always passed down through families. And even when my ancestors traveled away to distant lands in search of a cure, a spell, anything or anyone that could help us, it followed us. No shaman's words, exorcisms, prayers, anything, nothing worked to remove it. Each time they were powerless, and the demon would claim what was owed. It wasn't the only thing to be riddled with death. Our bodies and those close to us always suffer. Our homes soon fall to decay. Businesses regularly go bankrupt. And we often become outsiders wherever we go. Our pets always end up dying, and we have black thumbs, so our gardens always look terrible. All plants we own die. Nothing ever grows. Death follows us wherever we go. But anyway, the ritual was made and the demon had been summoned. I don't even know the name of the demon. No one does. I guess they didn't think about what the cost would be to their entire bloodline. When they summoned him and they asked for victory, they got it. One of the brothers was placed on the throne, but it didn't take long before sterility took hold. My family produces plenty of daughters, but few sons. If they did, the sons were never quite right. Their minds were always cruel and twisted, as though the demon's soul resided in them, and mocked them for their choice their ancestor had made. In the past, it was devastating to family fortunes. We have also been riddled with sickness, infertility, murder, unhappy marriages, disgrace. The other brother, angry for being passed over, was furious and soon. It was brother against brother. Both sides of the family clashed. When sins against family were committed time and time again, we lost the throne we made the bargain for to begin with. So, all the suffering that followed was for nothing. Another family rose, and was surprisingly merciful to the remnants of my family. They lost their status, but didn't lose their lives. The remaining sides of the family married into each other, and never did the family ever rise to former prominence. They did all they could to restore what was left of the family fortune. There were whispers about the family being off, tainted with madness and depravity. They weren't wrong. The demon still collected the suffering of the family. The issues continued, and we weren't able to hold it back anymore. Every decade, in order to reduce the impact of the curse on all the members of the family, all the suffering is focused on one person. The pain of one person to ease the suffering of all. Someone gets sacrificed, and everyone in the family is forced to watch and participate. The harm done to those who participate is lessened each time it happens. It is at a point now that no one in the family has ever been destitute. Our businesses tend to do okay. Never great, but they don't sink anymore. Perhaps a life of mediocrity is part of the demon's great plan for us. As you can imagine, family gatherings are never pleasant. When my friends ask why I don't like my family, it is difficult to tell them why. I can't tell them. I just tell them that they're weird or that they make me uncomfortable. Neither is a lie. It isn't easy speaking to people who would do that to you, or someone you were close to, or who would take pleasure in it. We have to keep up appearances and spend time with each other. All the family gatherings have tasty food, gifts, and fake insincere smiles. Every time I see them, all I can think of is, who will be next? How many of them would delight if it was me or one of my siblings rather than their own children? The way we decide who eventually dies is, apparently, a name is pulled out of a hat by a council of elders, or whispers from the ghost of the distant aunt. One of my cousins told me they go by the least favored child, something the child has done to make people angry or hostile in some way. The one who is least likely to achieve anything in life. How it is decided makes zero difference because in the end, it doesn't matter. My name was drawn. I am doomed to die. I am not innocent. I have done this since I was a child. I willingly joined in with the bloody rite. Each time I focused on what needed to be done. It was a task that had to be completed. Something we had to do. Not something we wanted to do. I didn't care about the pain of my extended family members. It is normal for us. Many family members tend to resort to an outside means as a method to cope. We can go to no one for help. It is a secret. Each of us caught up in our own personal hell. It is as normal as any other family tradition. Even though I knew there was a chance. I never believed my name would be finally written in blood on the household door. There were no warning signs that something was coming. No haunted whispers. Nothing that I could foresee what was going to come. It wouldn't have mattered if it did. Can I run? Well, I don't think I will get far. And I know what will happen to my family if the ritual doesn't happen. All the suffering would return. Perhaps the demon would be angry at them. I don't know. Either way, who can I go to without incriminating myself in the process? So, I have to endure all of it. I will be taken deep into the woods. So deep that no one ever goes out that far. Away from any prying eyes or help that could rescue me. We would walk through the forest for days until we reached our destination. There is no mistake it will be me who will be sacrificed. I will wear a coarse red gown with a red dot on the front and back. The rest of the family will be cloaked and masked. Their faces hidden from view. I will be able to tell who each person is though. Perhaps the masks are to keep people anonymous, just in case we were caught by some good Samaritan. The skulls of previous family members who have been sacrificed will surround me in a circle. It is said they whisper things. Sometimes encouragement, other times threats, and perhaps even deranged babbling. A pattern is painted on the floor using the blood of the previous victim. Offers of food, gold, and other valuables are placed around in a circle, as much as a family as a collective can afford. The demon does not tolerate cheap or shabby offerings. And from what I know, there is no specific time during the night it is done. The elders chant some strange words, and the hourglass begins. This is always when it is the most awkward. Sometimes people would beg and scream. Others would try to run. But some just simply accept their fate. The family, everyone, From the elders to the children will be there to witness, and slice or pierce my body. If you are old enough to hold a pen, you are old enough to join in on the rite. I will slowly be skinned alive. If I'm not alive throughout, then the process won't work. My blood will be drained for the next ritual. Slowly, each of my organs will be pierced. Enough to drain me of life, but not to kill me. Never to actually kill me. My body will be slowly roasted. All to prolong life, and cause as much suffering for as long as possible. If I'm in pain, then the demon will see it, feel it, and not spread the suffering to my other family members. Or maybe it will lessen the toll they experience. Once that is complete, and if it is done correctly, I will still be alive. And my family will tear pieces of flesh from my living body, and they will consume it. The last thing I will see is my family devouring me. I don't want to die. I don't want to die like this. They're here. For me. How long must I linger like this? How long must the gods curse me to remain locked away in the shadows of night? It has been thousands of years since I have been sealed away in my tomb, with nothing and no one to keep me company. My tomb contains all the offerings one would expect. The walls are painted with symbols of my glorious deeds in life. Countless amounts of gold, tributes from destroyed foes, and the lifeless corpses of those to serve. There are statues of my body throughout the differing stages of life. I try to step through the doorway, but it is blocked off. Not only with a thick stone door, with symbols and talismans, all of them designed to keep me inside. How long must I linger in here? I look down at my body. My earthly vessel has changed from the one I have now. If I am to take human form again, I need to embrace someone. I have walked these long, empty corridors for an eternity, searching and seeking someone. My love was not buried beside me. Occasionally, I hear scratching from outside my tomb and the sound of men's voices. I try to call out to them, try to get them to reach me, and to understand how I long for human company. When I hear the men's voices, they sound different. In the small cracks in the walls, they look different from my kin. Their clothes do not make sense. And yet, all I want to do is bring them close to me, feel their warmth against my skin, and to taste their lips. I want them. I whisper to them while they sleep in hopes they would hear me. I can hear them moan my name, foreign on their lips, and they thrust up into the sheets while they dream I am there. They dream of my caresses, my kisses, and my intimacy. How many mortal men experience the love of a goddess made flesh? I feel alive when I hear their cries and their pleads for me. I conquer those around me during their dreams, and I know they will come for me. When they awaken, filled with shame, dazzled and amazed while they clean themselves up in the morning, I watch them as they stumble around, their minds still lingering on my touch. my whispers and promises. They ask themselves if it was true, deny themselves what they know to be true. Before they realize it, their digging would increase in speed, and they will deny themselves sleep, food, and water. Their mortal bodies are frail and need food. Yet, I have needs that are required. One by one, they drop. One by one, their hearts gave out. Until there is only one left. A sole survivor. He clung to life, finally managed to open the door of my tomb, and it creaked open. A gush of fresh air filled the tomb. The seals broken, and at last I was free. I stepped towards my rescuer, cupped his face in my hands. As he stared up at me, I knew he saw me as a savior. He leaned up to me. I knew what he was going to whisper. They always did right before. I wanted to spare him, but instead I drew him close. I needed it. My lips connected with his, our bodies entwined and connected. When he did so, he embraced death and came willingly in more ways than one. I watched the life drain from his eyes, a look of peace as I finally took my true form once more. My flesh filled out. My feminine form returned with rounded hips and full breasts. With the ritual complete, I released him and watched him fall to the ground. Dry, brittle. And finally, his body cracked into the smallest of pieces. And I was finally free to explore the world once more. Every day I stare out the window and wait for them. They said that the supplies would come months ago. There would be more than enough food and water for us, where we wouldn't need to ration anymore. It has been so long since food was so readily available. We could eat for pleasure rather than necessity. I can't remember what it was like when I wasn't hungry. My parents left a while ago to reach an outpost across the barren surface of Mars. The reason why we came here at all was, well, the government would clear all my parents' debts and pay them a good salary. Once the planet was completely terraformed, we would be leaders and be well off. Something my family have never been on Earth. A planet I can barely remember. It isn't even home to me anymore. That is, if we manage to survive somehow. I remember at first, the government of Mars would send us guards and regular supplies. Even the oxygen has to be rationed now. It is expensive, so we needed to keep it to a minimum. But my dad, he is really clever. He made a system using plants to help give us all a boost. I have to admit though, the plants, they really struggle now and then though. Before we came to Mars, we needed to take tablets and a range of other medicines in order to adapt to the new climate. It made all of us sick. But me most of all. I ended up not being able to use my legs, and it only got worse when we landed. On top of that, I got sick a year or so ago. I struggle with breathing every now and then. My gums bled and my teeth fell out. My hair fell out in bloody clumps. I kept my hair just as a memento. I keep it in a box beside my bed. My dad told me we'd need to stick them back in. My teeth, that is. Not the hair. My hair will grow back. At least that's what he said. It still hasn't yet, though. I don't know. They made me a wheelchair out of bits and pieces. I'd always do my best to help the rest of the family. You know, so long as my chair is with me, I can do anything and everything. And I enjoy working. I've never liked other people doing other things for me. I like being independent. So I clear out the machines of debris, keep the plants hydrated, and make sure I do everything I can to make sure the place is nice for when my parents finally come home. With my parents gone, I maintain the facility all by myself, and I keep an eye out for them to make sure I don't miss them when they come back. I miss them so much. But there were many, many good times. We used to sit around the kitchen table and talk about our hopes for the new colony. How we would have respect for being one of the first Martian families. I remembered when they had to set out. It was always nice. They promised they would come back for me while they packed. They needed a lot of things for the journey. They took some clothes, food, medicine, our papers, oxygen masks, and some money. The latter two were to pay the guards and to verify who they were. There are a lot of bandits now. Groups of them would randomly attack, and we'd have to drive them off. I've killed more than a couple, you know. We needed to stay safe from them. They used to attack nearly every couple of months for supplies. I can't remember when the last one was. Ever since it got hotter, their attacks have become rarer and rarer. I asked my parents back then if I should pack my things too, and they told me no. I would stay guard and protect the facility with the old gun. My parents needed the more modern ones to make sure they got to their destination safely, and I understood. Every day I would sit and look out. I'd rest my hand on the gun and wait for any sign of trouble, or any sign of my parents coming back. Every so often, I would lose focus and sip what was left of my water. They still have not come back. I miss them. They have a letter they told me to open if there is an emergency. And to only do it a month or so after they left. It has been much more than that. At least 6. I can't help but think something happened to them on the road. I hope the bandits didn't get them. Still, I wasn't going to worry until I was sure something had happened to them. Finally, curiosity got the best of me and I opened it. A sinking feeling in my heart as I did so. Lara, we are sorry. You wouldn't have survived the journey anyway. There is a single bullet in the gun. Use it on yourself and spare yourself the pain of suffocation or starvation. We're sorry we couldn't do it to you ourselves. We love you. Please forgive us. With all our love, Mum and Dad. I have found myself wondering whether I should share this with anyone. I found my grandmother's journal last week. It had been stored in the attic during the move to her new home. I'd gone over there to help her organize her things and to clean. I've always wanted to learn more about my family history. The book was leather bound, written in cursive, and was pretty thick. She wrote in it regularly throughout her life. The paper was slightly different when new sections had been added. I settled down to read it one day. It started when she was 9 years old. She spoke about her family, my great-grandparents and her siblings. It was pretty interesting to hear how she lived. She mentioned a friend of hers, her best friend, a small boy who lived across the street called Peter. Peter and her would frequently play together. It was pretty sweet. As I read, she wrote about her dreams and the rise of World War II, a war she lost both her father and her brother. She talked about the rationing, the bombs, and the stress of invasion. Yet, Peter remained consistent. I was curious as to why Peter was not called in to serve in either of the world wars. She didn't say. He was a regular feature in her writing. Otherwise, her childhood was quite unimpressive, so I'll skip to her teenage years. At first, I wondered whether or not Peter was a childhood ghost. A best friend, but it sounded like he aged as she did. She told me he grew tall and handsome. I felt a little strange reading this, and I knew I had no right to be. My grandfather's name was James, and I think she had a bit of a crush on Peter. She mentioned how her mother didn't approve of Peter, and by all accounts, I couldn't see the reason why. On the 13th of July, 1950, she began to have nightmares of a person watching outside her bedroom window. As I flicked through the pages, I noticed it was recurring and kept happening again and again. Each time, the figure became more and more clear. A black shadow with glowing eyes. When she spoke about it, her family told her to be quiet. There were many people in pain after the war ended, and life was returning to normal. They figured it was just a nightmare. When I turned the page, I saw the drawing of the figure. The eyes stared up at me, and I instantly began to feel uneasy. I kept reading more about Peter and my grandmother. They went on several dates and were courting, essentially dating with marriage in mind, so to speak. I couldn't read her journal one night and needed some time to rest. I placed a bookmark inside, lay down in bed, and turned on some relaxing music to fall asleep to, and began to flick through my phone. I liked a few pictures, commented on a few things, when I noticed a reflection. It happened so briefly. There was a black shadow. When I blinked, it was gone. I laughed to myself and decided it was definitely time for bed. I curled up and slept. I found myself in an empty room. The white paint was peeling off the walls, and the door slammed shut behind me. I jumped, looked around, and thought I could see the shadow figure. Instead, I saw Peter. Exactly as my grandmother had drawn and described him. He stared at me, unblinking. There was a stillness about him that frightened me. He said nothing, and I stepped backwards. That feeling would not disappear. I could see my breath, and I shivered in the cold. When I looked for the door, I discovered it was gone. I turned around and looked for Peter, half expecting him to be standing behind me, but he wasn't there. I was still trapped inside the doorless and windowless room. I shivered and ran my fingers along the surface of the wall, trying to find a way out. As my pace increased, I felt my heart rate rise, and I started to scratch at the wall, trying to find a way out. I needed to get out. I could feel eyes on me in the darkness, and I needed to get away from whatever it was. Please, please, I begged to myself. I felt a breath on the back of my neck. My scratching became louder. I could feel both the wallpaper and my fingernails peel away. I felt fingers moving through my hair. I tried to scream and no sound came out. I kept imagining the shadow figure behind me, ready to grab me and hurt me. You need to run. A voice came from the opposite end of the room. I looked in the direction and saw an open window, the night sky bright and the moon illuminating the room. I turned and ran, not looking back into the dark, and leapt out the window. I felt my body fall through the air, and when I was about to land, I woke up in my bed, breathless and coated in sweat. It was nothing but a nightmare. I got up, showered and brushed my teeth before checking the dark circles under my eyes. They were darker than they usually were. I leaned in close to study my eyes. Something about them looked different. I decided to ignore it for the time being, got dressed and brushed my hair. All I could think about was continuing to read my grandmother's journal. I kept thinking about Peter, the nightmare I had, and I found myself drawn to it. I opened it, lifted the bookmark, and started to read again. My grandmother wrote that Peter would come over to her house at all hours of the day or night. That, on the odd occasion, she would see him standing inside her room, staring at her from the corner, silent and unmoving. I felt a feeling of dread. Why was I now seeing him? I kept reading, and surprisingly the next few paragraphs were relatively quiet, uneventful. She met my grandfather, James, and only considered him to be a friend. As I kept reading, my eyes were drawn to the corners of the room, and I had a feeling I was being watched. My vision began to blur, and I could barely focus on the words in front of me. I kept hearing whispers around me. Eat him, eat him, eat him, eat him, eat his flesh. They went on for a long while. The shadow with the glowing eyes kept watching me, circling, and I wondered just how my grandmother had managed to escape. I opened my eyes and saw Peter, exactly like his photograph, exactly like how she had drawn him. He smiled at me. His face perfect, too perfect, and without any blemishment or sign of suffering. He didn't even look real. Eat his flesh, eat his flesh, eat his flesh, eat his flesh, eat him. I reached out and placed my hands on either side of his cold cheeks, frozen to my touch, and leaned forward. My teeth sank into his skin, and he screeched in surprise. As I pulled away, I could taste the blood and the flesh. I chewed the raw meat, swallowed, and went in for the next bite. It was the best thing I had ever tasted. He didn't pull away. A feeble stop was all he muttered, and I continued to eat my fill. I gorged myself. My stomach bloated, and soon fell into a dreamless sleep. When I woke up, I could feel something in my teeth, and could taste the distinctive metal taste of blood. I opened my bedroom door to see my grandmother standing there. She pulled me into a loving hug, and I accepted it. I was confused. I didn't hear her come in. "Welcome to the family, darling," she whispered into my ear. In the Water. Written and narrated by Lady Spookaria. Hello, my little spooklings. So today, I'm doing something a little bit different. In the Water is a story I wrote many years ago. It was my first Halloween special back in 2019. At the time, I wasn't happy with how the audio turned out, and it has been a goal of mine to redo it at some point. So today is the day, here it is. Also, please let me know what you think. For those who remember, here's another little treat from the past. It's time to grab a warm drink, sit back, curl up with a blanket, and get ready. I present to you, In the Water. This event happened many years ago during my childhood. The family had made the journey by car up to the Central Coast. Apparently we had been there before when I was really little, but I don't really remember it. We were going to stay with my aunt and uncle at a holiday resort. Again, it was the same place we stayed when I was really little. I slept most of the way, like I usually do with long car trips, and it would often mean I would have a burst of energy when we arrived, which was particularly annoying for other people who were tired from the journey. I don't remember the dream if I had one. Dad placed his hand on my shoulder and shook me gently to wake me up. I rubbed my eyes and looked around. It didn't take me long to fully wake up. The resort was pretty big. I could see a barbecue area, a playground, several cabins, manager's office, and it was really close to the water. The dock was close by and could be seen by the cabin we were staying in. I got out of the car and looked around with my sister. She remembered a lot more than I did. She pointed out something she remembered. We got fish and chips for dinner and settled in. The cabin had several different bedrooms, so it meant my parents would share one room, my aunt and uncle would share another, and my sister and I had 2 single beds in a room close to the front of the cabin. The floor was wood. It was old, creaked when you walked on it, and there was no carpet in the cabin. The furniture was all pretty bare bones, but I didn't expect anything different. Everyone else was tired and went off to sleep fairly early. Since I had already slept, I couldn't settle down to sleep and felt restless. I could hear the faint snoring from the other rooms. I looked over towards my sister. She was sound asleep. I briefly regretted sleeping earlier because now I was wide awake. Naturally, my parents told me to stay in bed so I wouldn't wake anyone up. But perhaps I should just get a glass of water. Slowly I looked around the room. It was quiet, dark but not perfectly black. I decided against it because the floor was creaky, and I didn't want to wake up my parents. My dad could be quite grumpy when he was woken up, and he was also quite the light sleeper. So I pulled the blanket up over my head, snuggled into it, and rolled over to face the wall. I blinked a couple of times, thinking about the day. Slowly I began to feel myself drift off to sleep. But right when I was doing so, I could hear a notorious creak from the other side of the room behind me. I froze. I drew in my breath and was as quiet as possible. I wanted to make out who it was. I used to be able to recognize everyone's footsteps in the family. Mum's, Dad's, my sister's. I knew them all. This one sounded different. I hadn't heard the door open. And the last I saw, my sister was still asleep in bed. Or at least, she should have been. I tried to force myself to relax. It was a strange place, and I have a vivid imagination at times. Surely that's all it was. The walking started again. The gait was slow, awkward, like feet being dragged along the floor. Slowly the footsteps came toward me and stopped at the foot of my bed. Then nothing. I gulped. It wasn't anything. It was just my imagination. That's all it had to be. That's all it was. I wrapped the blankets tightly around me, still pretending to sleep, and hoped whatever it was would just leave me alone. I waited for who... It couldn't have been anyone else. It had to have been my sister. She was the only person who would do something like this. Maybe she was going to poke me or try to scare me. Nothing. Then I felt a weight on my feet. Someone was sitting on me. My eyes widened in fear and my body was tense. I waited for my sister to say something or joke around. Anything. I don't remember what followed. Eventually, I must have fallen asleep. I woke up the next morning later than everyone else. It felt as though I hadn't slept properly for months. I was drained and felt faint. Maybe I ended up oversleeping. I rubbed my eyes and could smell breakfast cooking. Pancakes, toast, bacon and eggs. My stomach grumbled instantly. I pushed the blankets off and placed my feet on the floor. I stood up and saw my blankets had a wet, dirty patch where my feet had been. It smelled like the river. I reached out and touched it, rubbed the dirt between my fingertips and stood staring at it. What? There were 2 footprints on the floor. They were both dirty and still wet. They were the only ones there. I stared down at them in fear, anger, and confusion. I didn't think it would have been my sister. They were far too large and were so narrow. Who else could it have been, though? It was quite an elaborate prank for her. I didn't want to get in trouble for getting the place dirty. I turned and said to my sister, "Why'd you try to scare me last night? Why were you wet and dirty?" "What? No. Why would I do a thing like that?" "Well, who else could it have been?" Things escalated and we started yelling at each other. My dad came in, and as expected, he wasn't happy about us fighting, or about the mess on the floor. I tried to tell him it wasn't me, but he wouldn't listen. I had to clean up the mess, and I was not pleased about this at all. But what else could I say? I cleaned up the mess and joined my family for breakfast, but when I saw the food, I felt nauseous and barely ate. I barely picked at my food before we walked to the water. The river was beautiful. The water was peaceful. The sound of water was endless and relaxing to listen to. It had that distinctive smell. We were going to go fishing for the first time. My uncle had brought my sister and I fishing rods. We caught plenty of fish. And, hilariously, my uncle didn't catch any. And he actually sulked about it. It was pretty funny. Later on that evening, I walked along the dock and looked down into the water. I thought I saw a long, white eel, but then I noticed there was a hand attached to it. What? It started waving up at me, curling its fingers to encourage me to get closer. I couldn't look away from it. Whatever it was, I was spellbound. The pale hand circled around in the water. I leaned closer. Nothing else mattered or existed anymore. I wanted to get a closer look. What then looked like a head was about to rise to the surface. When my dad grabbed me and did that thing where they hold on to you, but pretend they were going to push you in the water. I squealed and burst into giggles. The spell, or whatever it was broken. I could move and look away. The underwater figure had disappeared. It had been a long day. We walked back to the cabins to eat dinner and get ready for bed. I couldn't help but look back at the water. But I saw nothing. I had a strange feeling I was being watched from it, though. I was nervous about going to sleep. I got ready for bed. It was a lot warmer than it had been previously, so I just wore a singlet nightie and only had my blanket around my legs. I curled up and watched as my sister read her book with the light on. Eventually, she turned it off and said goodnight. I was tempted to ask her to stay up late with me, and maybe she would have, but I didn't. I shivered and waited to see what would happen next. Slowly, the noise of the cabin died down, and the sound of light snoring could be heard. Then, nothing. Not a sound. All I could do was relax and hope I would fall asleep soon. I rolled over to face the wall, sighed, wiggled my toes, and began to drift off to sleep. I was so close. I heard the footsteps again. They got louder, more chaotic, as whoever or whatever came up behind me. It didn't stand at the foot of the bed. It stood by the side, with me being stuck between it and the wall. It said nothing. I said nothing. I shivered. I could feel it sit on the bed behind me. I tried not to say anything or move. I couldn't speak. My eyes wide in horror as I felt it curl in around me. It was wet. The frame was small, like a child, about my height and weight. And the bite of the cold was sharp. It hurt so much. It hurt so much. It was so cold that it burned. It lay close to me, on me. I closed my eyes, pretended to sleep, and silently prayed. I prayed to God, to anything or anyone who would save me from whatever this was. I heard a gargling behind me. It sounded like it was trying to speak to me. I closed my eyes shut. I said nothing. I must have drifted off to sleep. I awoke with my bed still wet. It smelled like the river. I wrinkled my nose in disgust. My sister asked me what was on the back of my head. I reached back and pulled seaweed? There was seaweed and grimy dirt. I didn't know what to say. Before my parents woke up, I put the bed linen in the washing machine, remade my bed, and got in the shower when I heard they were just starting to wake up. This wasn't much of a holiday. I wanted to go home. To be anywhere but here. Today, I went out onto the boat with my sister, uncle, and dad to try to catch more fish. We were pretty successful. I can't remember what kinds we caught. I kept double-checking over the side, paranoid I would see a pale arm, or a face, or possibly the boat would tip over. But it didn't happen. We got back to shore safely. The fish were being prepared for dinner. They were being cleaned and prepared for cooking. There was another family staying there that my family were getting close with. They shared their oysters, and I didn't want to try them. They looked like blobs of snot, but I was caught a chicken, so as a result of peer pressure, I decided to try it. It was interesting. My sister was playing by the dock. The water nearby was shallow enough to easily see things. I enjoyed this part. I've always loved nature and seeing animals in their natural habitats. You could see baby fish, occasionally a jellyfish or a crab, but she was most excited about an eel in the deeper end. I went over to look, but I missed it. Not that I wanted to admit it at that age, but I just said it was pretty cool. I'm not sure why, but I went to chat with my auntie when I heard a loud splash. I don't know how it happened, but she fell in. And honestly, it was pretty hilarious. I nearly wet myself with laughter and I couldn't breathe. My uncle was there to help her out of the water. She was asked why she fell in. Her face was bright red with embarrassment. And she didn't say why. It wasn't like her to be like this. Even after making a mistake, she would normally brush it off and be the first to laugh. When I pressed her about it, she told me to shut up and leave her alone. It was the last night we would be staying there. Everything was packed away so we would leave early. I felt better about things. The routine was pretty standard. I got ready for bed and made sure I was asleep first. I didn't want to be the last one to sleep again. I drifted off to sleep easily and happily, after a much-needed rest after a long day. I couldn't move. I woke up pinned between the wall and that cold, lifeless, wet body. The child, I think, it wasn't very large. I looked up and finally got a good look at it. The skin was deathly pale and slowly peeling off. The eyes were empty pits where eyeballs should have been. The body was bloated in some areas and skeletal in others. The lips looked as though there had been bites taken out of it. It was back, again. It held me tightly while I struggled to breathe. My arms were tightly pinned. I struggled. It was a lot stronger than I was. No. I tried to speak, but I couldn't. But it could. The freezing cold was on my neck. I could smell rotting meat and fish. The smell nearly made me sick.
Your sister was supposed to be payment for all the fish. I will see you again.
They kissed my cheek, and my eyelids felt heavy. The last thing I heard was,
we can swim together. Forever.
I haven't been back there again. Every so often I think about that place and wonder why I've had issues when I'm around bodies of water. This wasn't my last spooky encounter near one. It has been many, many years since that occurred, and I wonder what would happen if I went back. I didn't want to be payment for whatever this being was. I never want to go back. Ever. And I hope my sister never goes back either. I hope you